invited Emily Kelly, digital strategist here at Ogilvy, in to talk not only about how you can produce different formats, but what they're good for. Let's have a look at the pop-up studio first up. Now, this project involves landing at an event, setting up a mini TV broadcast studio for interviews, preferably on something like a trade show floor, twin camera setup and a backdrop, and you bring people in and ask them a series of questions, edit that footage up relatively quickly, and then push it out. So it's kind of a broadcast model, relatively quick to do. But how does it work, do you think, Emily, in terms of pursuing an audience?
Well, Barry, I think one of the biggest advantages we have with this particular setup is that it is leveraging events, which IBM frequently uses to target its target audience. The additional benefit that you have with this versus probably just relying on an event itself is that really the opportunity is really there to increase the reach of the event. So you can take this content and distribute it out through multiple touch points across paid, owned, and earned media. The other advantage is that we have a diverse range of people that we can pull in and get expertise from, and they can provide different viewpoints. So this type of content could be edited and cut in different ways to appeal to different audiences and different people that we're trying to reach.
Now, given it's from a live event, is it crucial to get it out quickly once the event's over, or does this have a long shelf life, this sort of content?
I think you have the flexibility there because you can use the content to really, for example, the content could be leveraged in social media and also if there's any own channels that IBM's leveraging to promote the event. So you can make it very specific to the event, in which case timing is really essential. So being able to do this quite quickly and roll it out quite quickly is important. However, you can also potentially, depending on the individuals you're interviewing, you can use the content for other things and for other communications.
It's an idea that's sort of taken off. It's been rolled out in a few other markets, and we're just seeing some footage here of now of the UK sofa chats. So similar Smarter Cities thing, and production-wise, same sort of deal, except instead of the interview chairs, they've rolled out a large sofa, and they've just invited people over for a chat. It's a bit more of a casual atmosphere. And the next one we're looking at is a case study or a testimonial. We shot this under a format we call the content engine, which is a great way to produce a whole bunch of different content out of a video interview. But we're focusing on the video part here. It was shot in a studio on a white cyc or limbo background, so you can put different graphics in at the end. So we've put mid-market graphics in this one in particular, and all the supers and titles to cut it along. Now, when you're dealing with customers and particularly testimonials, there's a lot of pressure to get the story exactly right. So in this case, we did write a script, go through a number of drafts, go through approvals and legals, and then the script was delivered through an autoprompter or an autocue or a teleprompter. So you can see in some of the takes, it's pretty obvious that the talent's reading it. So you've got the pros of being able to control the story, but I think the cons of the authenticity is not quite there in some circumstances. But you do get the customer telling their own story. Is that important, do you think, for IBM to let other voices tell their story? What are these sort of customer testimonial videos good for, Emily?
Well, the case studies, what we found with the audience, the IT audience and the decision makers that we're speaking to, is that case studies are really critical for them to be able to understand how IBM can contribute to their business, how it can deliver ROI with their IT investments, and it gives them something that they can take back to their stakeholders and make a case for IBM. It also, with the case studies, we just know that it is a way of really bringing to life what IBM can do for other businesses, and to be able to show that business value is really critical for IT, which is under pressure continuously to deliver value back to their organizations.
It's a little more tangible, I guess, when you've got somebody talking about it, but from a production standpoint, you've got to give yourself some lead time because we had to get everybody in the same room and agreeing to the same script. So it's a lot longer compared to, say, the pop-up studio where it can happen around an event. This one really takes a lot more planning. What do you do with footage like this once you've got it? Where does that go out through the ecosystem?
Well, the benefit of this versus the pop-up studio, as we talked about it, the pop-up studio is more timely, whereas this is something that can definitely live up on the IBM.com, on owned channels, and be there consistently as a supporting case study for individuals who are coming to IBM who are researching IT vendor partners, and again, gathering that information they need to make a case for IBM.
I think as a side note for this one, you'd want to make sure you're working with a good director or camera operator who's good with talent, because a lot of these people, they know their business, but cameras can be their kryptonite. It can really cripple them, and that fear can come across. So we're looking at the Shaping Our Future series of subject matter expert videos. This project took a little bit of time in the planning, but production-wise, pretty quick. We did have a lot of travel though. We either had to travel to the experts or fly them to locations. We shot them where we found them. Those were in hotel lobbies, they were at convention centres, they were in offices. Spent a bit of money on lighting and sound. You can tell they're longer format interviews, and the quality or the style is not unlike what you would see on a current affairs or documentary style show. And we get in depth with them about their expertise, about their history of working, about why they're pursuing their particular field in a company like IBM. Now you can get 60-second and 30-second grabs out of them, but the bulk of the content really is going to take a 3-minute, a 5-minute, or even longer, or the full transcript of the conversation to get the full value from it. Why would we pursue such long formats in video?
Well, for this particular project, it was critical because it was celebrating the centennial for IBM. So we had to talk about, where we had come from and where we're going into the future. It's not something, it does require that length, that depth, and it also requires that expertise. The production value really, I think, has to speak to that quality has to be there to get that message across and to get it to deliver to really convey IBM as that thought leader, and I think that really supports that message.
On the demand gen to brand spectrum, this sort of approach really suits branding and thought leadership.
That's true, but also when you think about targeting a C-suite audience for demand gen, we understand that when speaking to the C-suite, they want to be talking to their peers or equivalent or experts in their field, and that's the kind of input that they're going to value the most.
All right, let's take a look at Techlines, which was a webcast panel discussion that went out live on a certain time and date. There were 4 people handpicked from the panel and a moderator, filmed in, I think, the Sydney Theatre Company studios at Walsh Bay. So it was a pretty nice, elaborate set. Plenty of production quality went into it, something like a 6-camera setup. Everybody was mic'd really well. It was mixed live. And the audience, small audience, maybe 50, 60 people, but they were all handpicked social media influencers. Now, webinars and webcasts have been done for a lot of years, but there was something about this event that really, really worked from a results perspective. What do you think that was, Ems?
I think key to making Techlines work was having something that was a bit more of a talking point, more controversial, that would really generate that discussion. One of the challenges of engaging in social media is making sure that there is something that's worth talking about, and Techlines was really the basis for that conversation.
Another documentary, or what we're calling mini-mentary approach here, and this one is from the Growth Market Units, is this example, which is a story about Grameen. They are an Indian micro-lending bank that IBM helps with their infrastructure to make tiny, tiny loans all across India for economic development. Now, this is a production level really approaching television commercial level. So we're talking actually hundreds of thousands of dollars. We are talking several months in the planning. We're talking lots of research, clearly lots of international travel. But again, you get that combination of a case study. So it's a customer talking about how their business has been helped by IBM and how their business is helping other people. But you also get a little bit of depth, and you get a lot of, I guess, what we call eye candy or audience appeal, because it's not just talking heads. They're out in Indian villages. They've got shots of street life. It's very exotic and it's easy to watch. So there's a bit of, I wouldn't quite call it infotainment, but it's certainly making it a lot more consumable and a lot more human. But you are going to have to spend a lot more money, I think, on, for example, a second camera unit that goes off and shoots all the extra cutaway footage of villages and street life and the Indian countryside and population, as well as the straight up heads and shoulders interviews that you might do in offices. So definitely worth a look at for really big stories. A lot of this stuff needs to go through a ton of layers of approval and be aligned to Smarter Planet and go through those checks and balances. But you do get an incredibly rich story with a very, very long shelf life. This story is, as a case study, is about 3 or maybe even 4 years old, and yet the video content is just as relevant, consumable and shareable today as when it was filmed. Okay, what we've got here is an internal video for IBMers. It's actually to document the celebration of service, which is a day of volunteering for the IBM Centennial 100-year anniversary. Interestingly, no motion picture, film or video was harmed in the making of this video. It was composed entirely out of still photographs and animation. So what you've got here is a really clever way of producing video material without ever using a video camera or doing a shoot. So the day of service involved people all around Australia in different locations. So instead of incurring the cost and the planning of travelling around everywhere, they simply got photography from every individual installation or every individual act of service. Some of them are professional photographs, some of them are just happy snaps from digital cameras or even mobile phones, and so they've all been brought together into this one piece with supers and animation. So I guess the upside there is you don't really need a film crew or a film camera at all. You can produce it in this dispersed, disparate manner, capture all this information on one day, bring it together. The downside, very, very post-production heavy, so you will need to spend a lot of time in an edit suite. You will need to pay for an animator and the graphics, and once those animations are kind of done and rendered out, it's difficult to change them. You can't do edits as simply as you can as if you were dealing with shot footage or live footage or even stock footage. But that con definitely is outweighed by the pros of not having to travel, in this case around Australia with film crews, and do all that production. You can just get people to send in the imagery. Really great level of authenticity here. This is very genuine. It looks almost like photojournalism in some cases. These are not staged shots. These are not posed shots in the way that stock photography is posed. That's absolutely key when the whole objective of this particular piece of communication is the authenticity and the integrity of the people and therefore the brand. So that's another take on producing a video without any actual video. Now, for just a change of pace, here's an opening video or a hype video used typically at an experience or an event developed by George P. Johnson. Now, what they're doing here, I guess, is using a lot of animation and graphics. There's dramatic music, there's dramatic voiceovers, and the point of this video is really to set the mood in a live event, particularly for a keynote speaker or to open up an event. But as Grant said in part one, it's really worth thinking through the resolution, the production quality, and sometimes even the content, because these videos will have a life beyond that particular event. So they may wind up on IBM.com, and they might wind up being shared and distributed through a social media network through the earn part of the paid, owned and earned strategy. So it's definitely worth investing in higher res, particularly if you're putting it together with stock footage or putting it together with animation and graphics in a way that's going to be easily transmittable and the quality won't suffer. Because the great thing about content is once you have it, you can start to amortize the cost by using it in multiple channels. So even though it's been commissioned in an event environment, I know this is something Grant was keen to talk about, that's not the only environment the content's going to be used, and in fact it becomes much more valuable if it's produced in a format and a style that can travel. So that'd be the advice for event and experience style videos such as this one. Let's take a look at the Shaping Our Future series, which was actually a media partnership with News Limited. So what we've done here is, I guess it's branded content, or we're talking about content in service of the brand. So we essentially outsourced the entire production to News Limited. So the interviews were conducted by their journalists. They did their own camera crews, and they even sourced the talent. You'll notice the talent is not even IBMers. You've got people like Lindsay Tannen talking about finance, you've got environmentalists, you've got educators, mathematicians, industrialists and economists talking about, I guess, similar ideas that IBM's talking about in regards to Smarter Planet. Why are we spending this money, handing over control for a start, and spending this money to not even talk to IBMers about IBM? What's the value in that from a strategic point of view?
Well, what's really critical to us is that we're speaking to our audience about what they're interested in and what are the key topics. So it's one thing for IBM to go out there and say, this is the thing, these are the things we're going to be focusing on in the next few years. This is what's important to our business. But what this does is it really aligns what's important both to IBM's business, for example, from an industry perspective, to what's important to the Australian and New Zealand markets.
Alright, that wraps up part 2, all the different formats and approaches you might like to use in your video project. Stay tuned for part 3, the final installment of Focus, where we look at getting you an audience, distributing your video through the paid, owned and earned content distribution framework. See you there.